Okay, I want to talk just about the fun of culture in your travels. When you go to Italy, you find a festival in a little town here where the older kids are teaching the younger kids how to make a good ravioli. I see ways built into cultures how they go from generation to generation, the beautiful parts of the culture. In France, this small town in the middle of nowhere has enough money from the city hall, or the Chamber of Commerce, to fund an exhibit where you have orbs that let visitors appreciate the fine differences between the wines that they make there. And you develop a fine nose. And that's a life skill worth having in that part of the world. Europeans like to spend too much money for their loaf of bread in order to buy it from the person who baked it. You see, that's just an ethic of theirs. We might think, oh, that's so inefficient. Let's just go to Costco and we'll have a big freezer in our garage and we only need to go twice a month. And it's cheaper. You know, well, that may turn us on, but that's a horrible thought to Europe because they have a different kind of what we would call family values. You know, the fabric of their community. It involves going out and talking to people and patronizing small businesses and so on. Europeans really appreciate their fine wine. There's no question about that. And they also know where to fill it up really cheap. I just love these gas filling stations in Italy. It's the cheapest liquid money can buy is wine when you're in Italy. I'm very interested how in the United States we're so intent on legislating morality. I've always found this really interesting. A good example is prostitution. I've never met anybody who would say prostitution is a good thing, but prostitution just is. I don't care what kind of laws you have, I don't care what your religion is, there's always going to be lonely men who will pay for sex. And there will be women who will sell it. It's just the way it is. Now, you can make it illegal and you can just say no, or you can have a European approach to it, which would be pragmatic harm reduction. It's going to happen. How can we educate people and minimize the cost to our society? It's not saying prostitution's good, it's just pragmatic. So, in much of Europe, and it's difficult to talk about Europe in broad sweeps because every country's got its own rules, but in most of Europe, brothels are legal. And prostitutes are unionized, and they can't have their license unless they're checked by a nurse or a doctor so they're not spreading diseases, and they're routinely checked. And the notion is they run a small business there. It's all together in an area that's zoned for that. And when a prostitute has a dangerous customer and she pushes her emergency button, a pimp does not come to her rescue, but a policeman does. That's just, it doesn't work quite that easy, but that's the ideal and that's what they're shooting for. Whereas in the United States, we treat it probably quite a bit differently. One way, any way you cut it, it's a great tourist attraction. I was in a Starbucks in Zurich in Switzerland a little while ago, went downstairs to the toilet, and I stepped into the room and blue lights. Blue lights, this is strange. And then I remembered, oh yeah, blue lights. I cannot see my veins. I couldn't shoot up if I wanted to. Very clever thing. If you've got a toilet in your business accessible from the general public and you don't want junkies in there shooting up at all hours, put in blue lights and they'll go somewhere else. For years I've taken my groups around Europe and we go to places like Frankfurt or Switzerland and you see all these junkies, these wasted, scary looking needle addicts. They're just miserable looking people. And a lot of my tourists will say, these darn liberal Europeans, they got so many drug addicts. Well, it's not quite that simple. They've got no more than us. I mean, it's about the same, but theirs are still alive and out of jail. Ours die and are in jail or kept up quiet. We lost 18,000 people to heroin overdoses last year in our country. 18,000. Europe lost 8,000. It's a horrible problem on both sides of the Atlantic. In Europe, they deal with it in a pragmatic harm reduction kind of way. Across the street from that coffee shop, I saw a machine bolted to the railing over the river that used to sell cigarettes. Now it sells government-subsidized syringes, almost free. And in Switzerland, it's just a slam dunk. You got needle addicts. They're going to be sharing needles. Their lives are a mess. Do you want them all to have AIDS, HIV? No, you give them syringes, you know. That's a European approach. Of course, the moralistic American approach was, no, that would be condoning it, you see. Now, again, I'm just reporting here, but it's interesting that Europeans are dealing with the same problems we are with a different sort of approach. And they prefer their approach. Now, down the street from this place, in a little side street, where it's not so public, there's a government-subsidized heroin maintenance clinic. It's called Cafe Fix. All right? And this is where heroin addicts get their addictions administered. You got nurses, you got counselors, you got job counseling, you got a club, you got a community, you got help to get these people back on their feet. And they don't have the terror of where am I going to top up my addiction. And don't have to buy it from people on the streets who might forget to cut it and then they die. You see? This is hard stuff. This is at least worth talking about. And Europeans talk about it. And we don't talk about it quite as much. So I just think it's very interesting as a traveler to be tuned into this stuff as well as the Botticellis and the Beefeaters and the gondoliers. It sort of confounds the people from the tourist board when I come in with my public television crew and they say, do you want to, we'll take you to the resort. And I say, no, take me to Cafe Fix, you see. But I just want to kind of experience that in my travels. When you go to much of Europe, you'll find marijuana is about as exciting as a can of beer, you know. It's been 25 years since they arrested a pot smoker in the Netherlands. And 25 years later, they're glad they got it this way. Use has not gone up. A lot of Americans really worry that there's a whole reservoir of people that would love to ruin their lives smoking pot if only it was legal. Hello. Anybody who wants to smoke pot does. They just have to do it as criminals. This is what they found out in Europe, is that use does not go up when you change the laws. There would be a spike of curious people and then it would settle back down. In Portugal, it's been 10 years since they arrested, or 10 years since they legalized the consumption of all drugs, hard and soft. Drugs are legal for consumers. And 10 years later, even the people who were opposed to that realized this is smart. Use did not go up. They take the crime and the money and the violence out of it, and they treat the problem, which is a real problem, as an education challenge and a health challenge, and the authorities now have credibility. Some Americans say, well, marijuana is a gateway drug. One toke and you're on the way to addiction to heroin. And the Europeans have found the only thing gateway about marijuana is its illegality, because the only place to get it then is from criminals in the street who have a vested interest in selling you something more expensive, more profitable, and more addictive. So it's interesting stuff, and I like to get into it because I think it's a real problem in our society, and it's a difficult problem, like alcohol was during Prohibition. When they finally legalized alcohol, nobody was saying booze is good. They just recognized the law was causing more pain to society than the drug abuse itself. Drugs are bad. Drugs are not healthy. Drugs are addictive. They're not for kids. If somebody's drinking and driving or drinking and smoking, they should throw the book at you, you know. But it doesn't mean you've got to lock up 80,000 people like we have today in jail. It doesn't mean you have to arrest 800,000 people every year like we do. We arrested 800,000 people this last year, more than ever, for having marijuana, just for possession. These weren't rich white guys. These are poor people and these are black people. That's why the NAACP has finally realized drugs are a scourge, but the laws against the drugs are even worse for their community. So it's an interesting issue. That's why I've been a member of NORML for 10 years. That's why I'm co-sponsoring this bill that you might hear about next year, because we're going to try to make marijuana not just available for everybody. It's not pro-drugs. It's the best way to control a dangerous substance is to regulate it and tax it. That's what sophisticated people in this discussion believe. We've got 280,000 signatures. We just need 240,000, but there's a lot of bogus signatures, so we're still getting a few more. It'll be on the ballot next year, and then we'll all vote on it. And we stand to be the first state in the country to treat marijuana like hard liquor, basically. So it's a complicated issue, but please, if you're curious about it, don't just take a simplistic bumper sticker approach to it. You can Google Rick Steves and marijuana and learn more than you ever wanted to know about this subject. And in Europe it's interesting because they handle it differently. What I know about this is mostly from police and judges and doctors and professors who have been in this for a long time. When you study the differences between cultures, I just think it's fascinating, and I really like comparing America and Europe because we're so similar and we've got some fundamental differences. We're both affluent, Christian, love our capitalism, love our democracy, love our freedom. And when I look at it, especially these days with all the discussion going on in our country today with the 99 and stuff, I think in the United States we are government by, for, and of the people, and so is Europe. But on this side of the Atlantic, I think we are government by, for, and of the people via the corporations that we own. Not a judgmental thing, I'm just saying, you know, it just makes sense for society to have a government that creates a good environment so the corporations can prosper and we can all do great. In Europe, on the other hand, I believe they are government by, for, and of the people in spite of the corporations that they own. In Europe, you're more likely to see a law requiring you to pay for the disposal of your car when you buy it. Not because it's good for business, because it's not good for business. Because it's good for sustainability, because it's honest accounting. That would never happen here with our current sort of situation, because people would shoot it down. It's not good for that industry. So it's a complicated issue, but it's fun to go to Europe and see how they do things. And if you want to see Europe in the extreme, you go to Scandinavia.